Welcome to the 15th Annual State of Manufacturing. As we listen to Rob Autry's presentation of his survey findings, I ask that you think about three interrelated and important takeaways. First, the survey and our executive focus groups confirmed what we already knew. The manufacturing economy is starting to enjoy some overall stability after the long disruptions of COVID. Supply chains are settling down. The labor market, while still volatile, is finding some equilibrium, and the economy is starting to show some predictability. Second, the State of Manufacturing research revealed that many manufacturers are very aware of the actions of the recent legislative session that threatened to throw a wrench into what I just said. Executives are concerned about expanded paid leave requirements, a new employer-funded paid leave program, and cannabis legalization that includes new workplace drug testing policies. As Rob will point out, this is the first time in the 15-year history of the survey that specific government actions so directly affected the challenges that Minnesota manufacturers already face. The final takeaway is that small and very small manufacturers in particular fear that they lack the resources to cope with the new laws. This will have wide-ranging consequences. This group contribute greatly to the economies of all of our local communities. When they hurt, we all hurt, and the communities suffer. Over the years, Enterprise Minnesota has arranged more than 500 tours of manufacturing organizations to help them develop and forge relationships with their elected officials. Now, better than ever, is the time to use those relationships. The legislature can, and I would say should, provide a small business exemption to those new laws. And they will if we all reach out and tell our story. With that, setting the stage, I'd like to thank all of our sponsoring organizations. This year, we have 35 organizations that help bring this together, starting with we call our platinum sponsors, or industry exclusive sponsors, phenomenal supporters of the manufacturing industry, to the regional sponsors who will host this event as we travel across the state to 6 to 8 locations to present the data on a more regional and local basis. To the many focus group sponsors that help 10 focus groups bring together over 100 executives to talk about greater granularity of some of the findings. And of course, the one that so many of you enjoyed before this, the 9 Mile Brewing Company. So with that, please join me in welcoming back to Minnesota again, Mr. Rob Autry.
Oh, sorry. Thank you, Bob. Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be with you. As I think I've said for the last 14 years, I'm kind of surprised you keep inviting me back, but I'm thankful for that. So we've been interviewing manufacturing executives in Minnesota now for 15 years. 15 years, which is pretty amazing, actually. If you're kind of looking for a cultural reference point, over the 15 years that we've been doing this, there have been, I think, 9 or 10 Kardashian weddings in that period. So it's a pretty significant milestone that we've reached this year. When we first started doing this project, the first survey that we did was in December of 2008, when the country was in the midst of the worst economic downturn since the Great Depression, when U.S. manufacturing activity had actually fallen to a 28-year low. So we picked the perfect time to start this, right? And actually, it has proved to be the perfect time to start. Because over the course of that 15 years, we've collected a treasure trove of data around manufacturing in the state. Data that has allowed us to look at today's data and put it in the historical context of where we've been since 2008. You'll see a lot of historical look-backs in the deck that I'm going to present to you today. You'll also see there are some new questions that we asked for the first time this year, which we think kind of gives us a real good sense of how the state of manufacturing is today. So I'm excited to go through this with you. What I thought I would do is just first walk you through some of the nuts and bolts of what it is we did before we get into some riveting details. Get the nuts, bolts, rivet, never mind. That'll be funnier after the beer happy hour, I hope. So the survey that we conducted this year was done mid-August through mid-September. As we've done for the 15 prior years, or 14 prior years, we interviewed 500 or 400 manufacturing executives across the state. We specifically want to get to those in the manufacturing companies that actually make the decisions on how their business is operated. So we specifically screen and recruit owners, CEOs, CFOs, COOs, presidents, vice presidents, managing officers, the people who actually know what's going on in their business, the people who are actually making decisions about their business. In addition to those 400 interviews statewide, for the 8th year in a row, we've actually did an oversample, meaning we did additional interviews in each of the 6 Minnesota Initiative Foundation regions. This is designed to give us a much richer data set, particularly outside of the Twin Cities. And so we have at least 50 interviews of manufacturing executives in each of these 6 Initiative Foundation regions, which in total means we interviewed 523 manufacturing executives this year. The average length of an interview was about 24 minutes. So over 500 manufacturing executives spent nearly a half an hour with us on the phone answering important questions about their own business. As I get into this data, I wanted to kind of give you a slide that I felt kind of helps sets the stage for a lot of what we're going to be talking about today. This is a question that we started asking about 7 years ago. And it's kind of a big picture question. In terms of the business climate in Minnesota compared to 5 years ago, do you think things are getting better, getting worse, or staying about the same? And when we first started asking this question in 2017, for the first 3 years or so, most manufacturing executives told us they felt things were getting better in the state in terms of the business climate. You can see in 2020, we hit the pandemic and opinions started to change. The percentage who believed it was getting better dropped. The percentage who believed the business climate in the state was getting worse rose. And this year's survey, 50% of manufacturers, half of all manufacturing executives that we spoke with, felt the business climate in Minnesota had gotten worse. Only 14% believe it had gotten better, and about a third said it stayed the same. Now, one of the key takeaways from the survey is we have a pretty good indication of kind of what's driving those impressions about the business economy. And it's specific to the legislative actions taken this year by the legislature. In this survey, for the first time, we asked specifically about 6 different aspects of legislation that passed this year. And we asked manufacturing executives, how concerned or worried are you about that piece of legislation and the impact it could have on your business? And the bars you see here are the percent who say they're concerned about it. So at the top of the list, the lack of small business exemption for paid leave, meaning small businesses will be forced to provide the same benefits as larger corporations. 77% of manufacturing executives said they were concerned about that. 56% said they were very concerned about it. Not far behind that, the costs associated with funding this new paid family and medical leave act through a new payroll tax split between an employer and employee. 72% are concerned about that. 47% say they're very concerned about that and the impact it could have on their business. New requirements for paid sick and safe time, 68% concerned. Cannabis in the workplace, limits being able to regulate it, 60% concerned. Even the new wage theft law, 44% concerned, and a little more than a third of manufacturers said they were concerned about the ban on non-competes and the impact it will have on their business. Very, very high concern levels. In fact, when we took all of this together and looked at it among our total sample, 83% of manufacturing executives told us they were at least concerned about one of these issues and the impact it could have on their business. Only 17% said they were not concerned about any of this legislation. Now, when we looked at it by type of manufacturer, and one of the things that we'll do a lot in this deck, and if you've seen this in the past, is we specifically look at lower revenue manufacturers, those who have less than $1 million annually in revenue, those that are sort of between 1 and 5 million annually in revenue, those over 5 million in revenue. And then we also look at size of manufacturer in terms of the number of employees they have. 50 or fewer employees, and over 50 employees. It's an eye chart, a lot's going on here, but here's the key takeaway. On the 4 big ones at the top of that previous slide, you have solid majorities of lower revenue manufacturers and higher revenue manufacturers, those with fewer employees, those with more employees. Solid majorities are concerned and worried about the legislation that was passed and the impact it could have on their business. We also asked for the first time, based on these legislative developments, do you think they've made the state more attractive or less attractive for business? Or has it not really had an effect one way or the other? Only 6% of manufacturers said they felt the actions taken by the legislature this year has made the state more attractive for businesses. 30% say it's not really had an impact, but 60% of manufacturing executives say those legislative developments have made the state less attractive for business, with 42%, more 4 out of 10, saying it's made the state much less attractive. And when we looked at it by type of manufacturer, a solid majority of every single type of manufacturer, those in the metro area, 54%, those in greater Minnesota, 72%, by revenue, by employee size, a solid majority say it's made, those legislative actions have made the state less attractive for businesses. So that's what the data says. Let's hear from an actual manufacturer and someone from the Minnesota or Enterprise Minnesota team.
Hi, my name is Heather Braimbridge-Cox. I'm the president and CEO of Windings, Inc., located in New Ulm, Minnesota. We're about 90 miles south of the Twin Cities. Windings builds electric motors, custom electric motors. And when you hear electric motors, most people think of household appliances, ceiling fans, vacuum cleaners. You wouldn't find our motors in any of those items. Instead, you would find our motors landing on Mars, or a component to a system for the F-35, for defense systems, missiles, commercial and military jets. That's where we play, that's our sweet spot. We perform really well where the specifications are high and the requirements are in a heavily regulated area. So we are able to respond to unique packaging, high performance, maybe extreme environments such as high temperature, so highly designed, heavily regulated, but we have fun doing it and we're always involved in some fantastic project. The 2023 legislative session in Minnesota brought about some changes in our HR laws. And one in particular is the non-competes are now banned. For a company like ours, we're highly technical. Much of what we do is protecting the intellectual property of our customers, their designs, their prints. So it does concern us that we're unable to have non-competes in our agreement. And in response, we've had to try to figure out new ways of protecting our IP and our customers' IP. The changes in the legislature in Minnesota certainly have been evolving. They're not at all final. And so we do expect continued improvements, new announcements. We're preparing for that by staying in touch with our human resources, the attorneys on the labor side of things who help to guide us through navigating, these changes and preparing for it. But I believe if we're doing a good job for our employees, if we are being reasonable with our policies in extending time, giving them the space that they need when they have adversities to deal with, then it shouldn't be so difficult for us to navigate this new law.
My name is Dawn Loberg. I am with Enterprise Minnesota. I am a business development consultant. I've been here 6.5 years. My job is to understand what a manufacturer's goals are, bring the resources to the table to help them grow profitably. I think that the current legislation that was just passed in the last legislative session, there's quite a bit of difference of whether it affects a small company or a larger company. I would like to talk a little bit over on the whole. I think what manufacturers are really concerned about is the state government coming in and telling them what they need to do. I work with over 50 CEOs on peer councils, and every single company actually offers more family leave and sick leave than what is even mandated in the system. So it's really causing them to have to probably hire additional employees due to the rules of sick and safe. And in an environment where we're going into the economy maybe going down, and it's really hard to find employees, for them to have to address adding more employees just because of that when they pay more than that already is a very large concern. I think the other factor, and I've done a little bit of research about this, I would say of the companies, manufacturers that I have talked to in the past 3 months, those who are planning to have either additions or are going to be adding another building, I would say 70% of them are considering moving out of Minnesota. I think it is so important that every manufacturer, whether you are a one-person shop or if you have 500 employees, that you make sure that your voice is heard. How do you do that? You get to know your legislators. Invite them to your business. Let them see what you produce. Let them see the culture of your company. Let them meet your employees and let the employees tell the story to these legislators. What a great family company this is. I think that's one of the key things that they can do.
Awesome. Thank you, Don. So next, we're going to look at some kind of big picture in terms of the business climate, and specifically how manufacturing executives feel the economy is going today. And Dawn kind of just touched on this a second ago in that video. We've been asking all the way back to 2008, as you think about this year, on the whole, do you think this would be a year of economic expansion, a flat economy, or a recession? And I just want to focus for a moment really kind of on the last 4 years for a second here. You can see there's really been a lot of volatility since the pandemic, not surprisingly. The numbers were somewhat stable for the portion of 2011 to 2019, but since 2020, we've seen these numbers bounce around quite a bit, and this year is really no different. Last year, one of the key takeaways was this heightened concern about a recession. 43% of executives last year told us they felt last year was going to be a recession. It's down 10 points this year to 33, so we've seen a little bit of lessening of the fear of recession. But I would also point out that's still 1 out of every 3 manufacturing executive who believes we'll have a recession this year. At the bottom there, only 16% of manufacturing executives believe we're in a period of economic expansion. 16. It is the second lowest percentage we've seen over the 15 years, and the lowest percentage was in December of 2008 at 8%. So we're at historic lows here in terms of the percentage of manufacturing executives believes we're in a period of economic expansion. Where we have seen a little bit of an uptick is what we're referring to a little bit here is economic stagnation, the fact that the economy is mostly flat. That's where a plurality of executives are today at 45%, up 10 points from a year ago. We ask, what do you think about next year in 2024? And we see a little bit of changes here. Those who believe we're going to be in a flat economy actually dropped 9 points as they look ahead to 2024. A slight uptick in economic expansion, but we find a plurality of manufacturing executives, a very slim plurality at 37%, believe 2024 is going to be a year of a recession. So things aren't getting any better in the minds of manufacturers as we think 12 months from today. Now, despite the fact that there's clearly some economic anxiety and uncertainty, manufacturing executives tell us that they're pretty confident that their company could withstand an economic downturn. On the right-hand side here, 85% of manufacturing executives feel confident that their company could withstand an economic downturn in the next year. Only 13% say they are not confident. Even when we looked at this data among those who were probably the most pessimistic, those 33% who believe we're going to have a recession this year, 83% of those executives still felt confident that their company could withstand an economic downturn this year. 16% were not confident. And this confidence, if you will, or certainty or optimism, however you want to define it, has been one of the most consistent data points that we've seen over the course of these 15 years. When we ask from a financial perspective, how do you feel right now about the future of your company? 86% of executives say they feel confident, 12% not confident. These numbers have been remarkably stable, even though we've seen impressions about the economy, the business climate, specific issues, which we'll get to in a second, fluctuate quite a bit. This hasn't. And every year I get this question, are manufacturers the most optimistic folks you've ever surveyed? And I will have to tell you, I don't know that this is optimism, right? I kind of go to this idea that, you know, an optimist would say the glass is half full, a pessimist would say the glass is half empty. I think a manufacturer is a little more pragmatic. You'd probably say that glass is twice as large as it needs to be. I think they're just more sure. They're more certain, they're more confident than they are optimistic. Now, one of the interesting things that we saw, and it's really hard to discern from this data, but if you look into the top column there, if you look at the 2019 numbers, confidence level was remarkably consistent by type of manufacturer. 93% of the metro companies, 93 in greater Minnesota, 93 among those less than $1 million in revenue. Go to a couple rows down, over $5 million in revenue, 95. The data was remarkably consistent. The pandemic hit and cards got reshuffled. What we saw there is the confidence dipped a little, but it dipped a little bit more with lower revenue manufacturers, those with fewer employees. And the years since 2020, where we are today, we've seen confidence largely recover among larger manufacturers. Those over $5 million in revenue, for instance, 99% are confident about the financial future of their firm. It was 96 a year ago, 95 in 2021, it was 90 in 20. Whereas the smaller manufacturers, those in less than $1 million in revenue, 75% are confident about the financial future of the firm. Same as it was last year, down from where it was in 2021, and even down a few points from 2020. So confidence has rebounded with larger, in terms of revenue and employee size manufacturers, hasn't quite reached or hasn't quite rebounded yet with the smaller manufacturers. Another series of questions we've been asking is specifically about 3 key business metrics. And we asked manufacturing executives, if they think about this year, do they expect to see increases, decreases, or no real changes in terms of their capital expenditures, in terms of their gross revenues, and in terms of their profitability? And what you're looking at here, the lines are the percentage of manufacturers who expect to see an increase in each of those 3 areas. Now, obviously, 2020, as we've seen in a lot of pieces of this data, reshuffled the deck quite a bit. We saw noticeable drops across the board on all 3 of those areas. But I think even more telling, over the last, compared to where we were in 2021, over the last 2 years, we've seen noticeable declines in the bottom 2 of this. Let's just look at profitability for a moment. Today, in this year's survey, 26% of manufacturing executives say they expect to see an increase this year in profitability. That's down from 31% last year, down from 41% 2 years ago. So 15-point drop over a 2-year period in terms of expected increases in profitability. Notably, what you don't see on this chart is 26% of manufacturing executives also tell us they expect to see a decrease in their profitability. So it's a wash. Gross revenues. 2 years ago, 51% expected to see an increase in their gross revenues. Last year at 39, it's down 8 points. This year, only 31% expect to see an increase in their gross revenues. Also, 26% expect to see a decrease in their gross revenues. Capital expenditures is the one area where we see a little bit of bright spot. It shot up in 2021 coming out of the pandemic. It bounced down last year, and it's ticked up a couple of points at 32% who expect to see increases this year in capital expenditures. But noticeable drops in 2 of those 3 key business metrics, revenue and profitability, and it's clearly tied around this uncertainty about what's going on with the economy. Next, we asked manufacturers to rate 10 different issues individually and tell us how concerned are they about these issues and the impact it's going to have on their business. And to do this, each issue we ask them to rate on a 1 to 10 scale. If it's an issue they're not at all concerned about, it's a 1 or some number close to 1. If it's an issue they're really concerned about, extremely concerned about, it's a 10 or some number close to 10. So what we're showing you here are the percent that rated it an 8, 9, or 10, meaning the high level of concern about that particular issue. And at the top of the list, attracting qualified workers at 44%, the cost of healthcare coverage at 43%, inflation, cost of employees' salaries and benefits, retaining qualified workers, and the recession are in the 30s as sort of secondary issues, developing future leaders, data breaches and cybersecurity, ongoing supply chain issues, and implementing automation down at the bottom. Now, that's how they ranked overall. There's some noticeable changes over the last year. I mentioned last year how inflation and recession were really big concerns, along with supply chain issues. We've seen those issues drop considerably. In fact, overall inflation was the #1 issue. Supply chains was number 3 last year, and you can see in our list it ranks number 9 out of 10 this year. At the same time, healthcare costs has actually inched up a couple of points. It was 41% last year. It was the 5th highest issue last year. This year it's number 2, functionally tied as the top issue. So let's look at what some folks at Enterprise Minnesota and the manufacturer have to say about this.
Hey, I'm Steve Haarstad with Enterprise Minnesota. I'm a consultant on the team here, been with the firm for 7 years. Got a background in engineering and business, and I focus on strategy, marketing, and succession planning to work with our manufacturers. Thinking about the macro environment, a year ago, the indicators were kind of all over the place, and nobody really knew if we were going to be going up or down or what was happening. It seems pretty clear now that there is some slowdown happening, that we're pushing towards a recession. A lot of folks are talking about maybe mild recession, which is good news because it was looking maybe more bleak in the recent past. When I look at the data, some of the things jump out to me. It's clear that our manufacturers are still expecting flat economy, recession type of economy going forward here. That means we certainly need to continue preparing, be mindful of how we're managing the store, right? I've heard a lot of experts say when you're moving into a time of slow growth or recession, it is critically important to keep an eye on your finances, especially cash. I mean, these kind of environments are ripe for our accounts receivable to grow, for terms to start growing, for people to be paying late, and our cash can disappear quickly and put us in a tough spot.
There's no question that the U.S. economy's outlook for 2024 is one that is flat to single-digit growth. The Feds recently said they're expecting 1.5% in 2024. Now, that is a very modest growth, but positive. A year ago, we were all expecting it to go the other way, right? And that's certainly not the case anymore. I think there is more positivity. People are having a more positive outlook. It will be slow growth, when we have a downturn in the economy or when the projection is to have flat growth, business leaders ought to be careful about spending, control cost. It's so important to understand the drivers of cost within your business and to respond to it. And always know what it is that you're going to be able to do in different scenarios. It's even the smallest of businesses can do some scenario planning. What if this happened? Then what would we do? And so my advice would be control your expenses. Be careful about what you spend on. If you are going to be spending, then invest in your growth, because this is going to come roaring back. The U.S. economy is quite resilient. It will come back, and we just need to hold the pattern until things are roaring again.
Awesome. We're going to do a little bit deeper dive on some of these key concerns that I just referenced in the previous slide, with a particular focus on some workforce-related issues. And I want to kind of start with where we left off on the previous slide. Oops. There we go. When we looked at these key concerns, and remember I had them rate them individually on a 1 to 10 scale. We're looking specifically at the 8, 9, and 10, it's a high level of concerns. We did notice a couple of different trends and breaks in the data by size of manufacturers. So those really small manufacturers, those who have 1 to 10 employees, tend to be more concerned with healthcare costs, overall inflation. Certainly when it comes to inflation and a recession, they're more concerned about those issues than sort of the middle-sized manufacturers and the larger manufacturers. Those middle-sized manufacturers, 11 to 50 employees, and those 50 plus, higher concern levels when it comes to attracting qualified workers, higher concern levels when it comes to retaining qualified workers. Two bigger issues with them than the smaller manufacturers. And specifically to the point about healthcare, when you look at that issue, where there's some differences on the top 5 issue by size of manufacturer, there's not much differences by smaller, middle, or larger sized employers. Healthcare costs are particularly consistent in terms of a concern across all 3 different breaks of manufacturers. Now, 2 of these issues, the top 2 issues at our list this year, were attracting qualified workers and healthcare costs. And we've seen pretty dramatic changes over the 15 years on these 2 issues as they've evolved. It's been asked the same way since 2008, so we have historical data to kind of really look at here. The blue line here is concerns about healthcare costs. And you know that when we started in 2008, you can see there heightened level of concerns about healthcare costs. In fact, for I think the first 5 years of our survey, it was the #1 concern among manufacturers. It peaked in 2011 at 71% rated a concern. That was the first survey we did after the passage of the Affordable Care Act. And manufacturers and the focus groups also told us at that point they were really unsure of what was going to happen to healthcare costs and healthcare coverage. Therefore, they were really concerned about it. As we moved past the passage of the Affordable Care Act, the concerns dipped a little bit. Last year, it had dropped to its lowest level at 41%. This year, it's up 2 points to 43. Conversely, when you look at attracting qualified workers, it didn't really register with manufacturers in terms of a top-level concern the first 4 or 5 years of us doing the survey. It did pop up in dominance in 2001, when 61% rated as a concern. It dropped last year to 53, and it's dropped another 9 points this year to 44. So interesting differences and changes in terms of these 2 issues among manufacturers. Specifically on the attracting qualified workers, one of the things that we've noticed over the last 15 years is this tends to be an issue or concern that's more pronounced among larger manufacturers, those who have more than 50 employees. That's the red line you see here. And in fact, when we go to that high level point in 2021, 77% of manufacturers have more than 50 employees said they were concerned about that issue, 20 points higher than smaller manufacturers. But since that point in time, the data has really leveled off between the 2. So we wanted to see where the decline was coming from, and it's coming from both smaller and larger manufacturers, but the decline is clearly steeper among manufacturers who have more than 50 employees. As a concern level, it's dropped 33 points in the last 2 years. Whereas with healthcare, we don't see much difference between smaller and larger manufacturers. In fact, really, this goes back to 2015, but you could see this going all the way back to 2008. The level of concern has been pretty consistent, like we saw in the first slide in the section, by size of manufacturers. And even today, larger manufacturers are a little less concerned about it at 38% than the smaller manufacturers at 44%, but this number and these data are pretty similar over the course of time. Now, I referenced earlier on our ability to really break this data down at individual levels, particularly outside the Twin Cities, because we really wanted to see what are the key concerns driving manufacturers in greater Minnesota. And so for each of the Initiative Foundation districts, we looked at what the top 2 concern levels were, and it was pretty interesting. In every single one of the 6 Initiative Foundation regions, inflation is either the number 1 or number 2 top concern. Remember, it's not the case overall, but in greater Minnesota and in these individual Initiative Foundation districts, it is either number 1 or number 2. In fact, if you take all of those Initiative Foundation interviews we did, average it out, 47% of manufacturing executives rate this as a high-level concern, overall inflation, 47%. Compared to the Twin Cities, it's the 5th highest issue. Inflation comes in at 34% as a top concern, tied for number 5 in the Twin Cities. So inflation, clearly a much bigger concern and a much bigger deal to manufacturers outside of the metro area. Going forward, we wanted to know from manufacturers what are the 1 or 2 biggest challenges your company is facing that might negatively impact future growth. And you'll see some pretty common themes here. Attracting and retaining a qualified workforce is at the top of the list. Nearly 4 out of 10 say that's one of their 2 or biggest challenges facing their company that might impact negatively their future growth. Inflation comes up at 32% and increasing costs of materials for your products at 31%. Those 3 clearly stand out from the other issues. You've got increasing costs of wages, unfavorable business climate, cost of health insurance that are kind of clustered as secondary concerns there. But the 3 big ones are workforce, inflation, and rising costs of materials. Now, when you look at this by type of manufacturers, as we've seen in other places here, this data, your larger, both in terms of employee size and higher revenue manufacturers say the biggest challenge for them is that attracting and retaining a qualified workforce. Over half of manufacturers in both of those higher revenue and larger employee size categories say that is one of their 2 biggest challenges. Compare it to the smaller, lower revenue firms, it's noticeably lower as a concern level. Now, for the entire year of 2023, we asked manufacturing executives, do you expect to see an increased investment in any of the following areas? And they could choose as many as they want. When we did it, we found that 56% of executives said they expected an increased investment in managing costs due to inflation at the top of the list, growing revenue and profitability 51, maximizing productivity at 50, and expanding sales within the United States at 46. That's kind of our top tier areas where executives expect to see an increased investment. Ones where we didn't see as much, expanding sales globally, only 13% mentioned that at the bottom of the list. Automation at 19%. We did see an uptick in cybersecurity, which is an issue we've explored in the past surveys, not so much on this one, but a quarter of manufacturing executives say they do expect increased investment in cybersecurity. That's up 3 points from a year ago. The other big gainer this year was expanding sales in the United States. That came in at number 4. That was up 3 points this year compared to a year ago. And when we looked at it by revenue breaks within the data, I think the kind of key takeaway, a lot of numbers here, but if you just focus on the shaded boxes for a second here. Smaller revenue firms, those with less than $1 million annually in revenue, there's really only one area here where a majority of manufacturers in that category expect to see an increase in investment, and that's managing cost of inflation. Compared to, say, the over $5 million in revenue, you've got 5 different areas that got a majority of manufacturers who expected increased investment. Yes, it's managing cost of inflation, but it's also growing revenue and profitability, maximizing productivity, expanding sales in the United States, and staff development. 51% expect an increased investment there, much smaller among the smaller manufacturers or smaller, lower revenue manufacturers. Thinking ahead, what would you say are the 2 or 3 most important drivers of your company's future growth? So we've looked at obstacles that might negatively impact future growth. This is more drivers for future growth. And it's really clear kind of what's at the top of the list: hiring new employees, new customers, new markets. Those are the 2 big areas, the most important drivers of future growth. All the other issues, not to say they're not important, but are just not quite at that level. And what's changed essentially over the year is we've seen an uptick in number 2, new customers and markets. That's up 3 points from a year ago. Capital investments up 5 points from a year ago, which kind of dovetails with some of that key metric data we saw earlier. And then implementing and using automation, which is only down at 10% here, is up 3 points from a year ago. So specifically on the hiring new employees, this is pretty fascinating data here. We've been asking manufacturers on the left-hand side here, does your company currently have positions that are open and are hiring? And for the first time that we've asked this question, a majority of manufacturers tell us they don't have any positions that are open and are hiring. 55% say they are not hiring. 44% say they are. A year ago, it was 8 points higher. 2 years ago, it was 18 points higher. So that blue line is consistently dropped over the last 2 years to where now a minority of manufacturers are actually hiring. And I would argue if you just look at the right-hand side of this, among those who are hiring, 75% of those manufacturers that are hiring only have the percentage of positions that are open in their company are less than 10%. So the vast majority of them are not hiring a lot of workers, just a few. And in fact, when you look at this by type of manufacturer, I would just kind of draw your attention. This is not going to probably work so well, but the lower, less than 1 million in revenue, 74% of them say they are not hiring. 23% of those with over 5 million are hiring, but if you look at it, most of them are hiring between 1% and 5% of their positions, right? Another 20% here. You look at these numbers on the far right side, 20% plus, or even 10 to 20% plus. Very slim numbers of manufacturers are hiring that many workers. Those who are hiring are really just hiring a handful. Employee size, hiring by employee size. We wanted to get a sense here, like we did with some other issues. Is the decrease, is that 18-point drop in hiring occurring among one particular type of manufacturer or not? And it's not really. I mean, we have seen over the years past workforce issues, much bigger deal and concern among higher revenue manufacturers and those who have more than 50 employees. So your larger manufacturers more focused on workforce issues as a concern level. They've also, therefore, been more likely to say they're hiring. 2 years ago, 91% of manufacturers who had over 50 employees said they were hiring. Today, it's 77%. So it's dropped 14 points over 2 years. Smaller manufacturers, those less than 50 employees, it's dropped 16 points over the last 2 years. Yes, bigger manufacturers are hiring at a much faster clip, but that decline over the last 2 years has occurred with both types of manufacturers. And then finally in this section, we've been asking manufacturers, how difficult is it to attract qualified candidates to manufacturers like you? And I would really just first focus on that total difficult line, which has been pretty consistent over the last 15 years. In the last 3 years in particular, 87% of manufacturers 2 years ago said it was difficult to attract the qualified candidates to companies like them. Last year, 84, this year, 83%. Where we have seen some difference in the data here is in the intensity level. The percent who say it's very difficult to find the workers they need. 2 years ago, that was 55% of manufacturers. Today, it's 40%. The first time that we've asked this question where we have a plurality who say it's somewhat difficult as opposed to very difficult to find the workers they need. It's still difficult, but the intensity clearly isn't as strong as it was 2 years ago. So, what are manufacturers doing to attract and hire new employees? What do they want their company to be known for? They tell us really 4 things: a work-life balance, competitive salary, safe work environment, flexible shifts. All of those score 50% or higher in terms of what they want their company to be known for. Industry leader, career growth, great benefits aren't bad numbers. They dropped a little bit below in the 40s. But the 4 at the top of the list are work-life balance, competitive salaries, safe work environment, and flexible shifts. So, let's hear what some folks at the Enterprise Minnesota have to say about this.
Hi, my name is Doug Von Arb. I'm the president here at Blow Molded Specialties in Foley, Minnesota. We are a contract manufacturer of industrial blow molded parts. We currently have about 140 people employed, and we work closely with Enterprise Minnesota to train our leaders and help move the torch forward in this company. In the last 10 years, we've increased our sales significantly, and we have not grown our workforce at the same rate that we've grown our sales. We've made people more efficient. We're doing a lot of things to streamline our processes, both on the ERP side and on the functioning at the press, to reduce the amount of labor that goes into the products that we build. And it's had a huge impact on profitability and the amount of sales that we can do without adding a lot of resources. Blow Molded Specialties is working diligently to build a strong team here with communication and the training and those things that we're doing. So if there's an economic downturn, we can navigate through that with the folks that we have. You know, I'm confident we're not going to have to lay anybody off, and we'll be in a good, strong position to leap out of that downturn with the strong folks that we have and grow the company further. One of our key risks is the availability of people. So it is our philosophy to train the people that we have, the people that want to step up and take that leadership essentials training and advance their career here at Blow Molded Specialties. They know, they've been here a long time, they know all the processes that we do, they can train new folks into that. It really makes us a stronger company.
Hello, I'm Joe Mulford. I'm the president at Pine Technical Community College in Pine City, Minnesota. Pine Technical Community College is a member of the Minnesota State Colleges Universities system, and we're just getting ready to celebrate our 60th year in existence. I've been in higher education for over 25 years. One of the things I'm most optimistic about after reflecting on my first 25 years in education is the tide that's shifted, that's moved more towards supporting career technical education programs in general. So we're seeing that in the K-12 system. So the counselors, the principals, some of those folks that are influencers regarding, parents that are regarding people's futures. There's more and more recognition for the value that going through a 2-year degree, and specifically into one that's got a high wage, high demand career field, like manufacturing or some of the other career technical areas. I don't recognize there's ever been more support for that pathway. One of the things that we were recognizing as we think about preparing people to enter the workforce in manufacturing is, if there's not more people moving into Minnesota or people that are graduating from Minnesota high schools, how can we help expand the workforce? Really at the core of it for us is, how do we get people that historically haven't participated in manufacturing to get excited and ultimately get engaged either through our learning models or directly with employment and manufacturing? the growth that we've seen over the last 2 years, really kind of as we've exited the COVID experience, has been in our career technical education areas. So enrollment in higher education has been on a historical decline over the last decade. The exception to that has been in career technical education programs. And I think that's exciting as we think about the future, whether that's in healthcare, manufacturing, IT, those kind of industries. And so manufacturing isn't really about competing with each other, manufacturer A versus manufacturer B. It's really as an industry. I think the industry needs to continue to come together, whether that's working through some organizations like Enterprise Minnesota, or maybe through a regional group that they might be a part of, or just an industrial park, and work together in collaboration with the college. I think the way that this will get resolved and that big solutions can happen is if we work together. It can't just be one employer versus another employer. I think it's going to have to be by industry. If manufacturers are interested and excited about getting involved with their local technical college and the programs that would support their industry, it's not any more complicated than just really calling up the program, contacting the faculty member in the program. That's all available on the website. Reaching out to the president or the dean of manufacturing and scheduling time to come over and take a tour, or invite those individuals from the college to come tour their facility, which is really exciting for those of us that work in the education field. We're excited to help people out, but we need to know what people are looking for.
Awesome. So the final section I'm going to walk you through today is specifically on company preparedness and culture. And I want to kind of pick up with where we left off on that last slide in terms of what it is manufacturers want their company to be known for. We looked at the data from this year, but I do think it provides an interesting look back to where we were a year ago. And a year ago, we see some interesting differences. In terms of increases, work-life balance this year has increased 3 points in terms of what companies want to be known for over time. We also see flexible work shifts has also increased 3 points. Career growth increased 4 points. We've also seen a couple of areas here that have dropped a little bit. The biggest drop is safe work environment, down 6 points. This isn't something companies want to be known for, really did pop coming out of the pandemic. It's dropped, I think, for the second year in a row here, but it's down 6 points just over the past year. But competitive salary and great benefits are also two areas that have been climbing in years past that this year have slipped a little. When you look at it by size of manufacturer, here's kind of the real big takeaway. Smaller manufacturers, those under 50 employees, are primarily focused on 3 areas they want to be known for: work-life balance, competitive salary, safe work environment. Larger manufacturers, kind of more of an all-of-the-above approach. Right? Solid majorities from work-life balance, competitive salary, safe work environment, flexible shifts, industry leader, career growth. Even down to the bottom, 71% want to be known as having great benefits, which is twice as high as those smaller manufacturers. So larger manufacturers who are more concerned about workforce issues, more likely to hire, also more likely to want to be known across a host of different attributes. One of the kind of takeaways here is planning in general, particularly strategic planning, isn't as prominent as what we've seen in years past this year. So this year we've asked on a different topic, does your company have a formal strategic plan? And what we found is 47% said they do, 47% said they do not. And yes, there are 6% of manufacturing executives who aren't sure if they have a strategic plan. It's not a typo, it absolutely is the case. I'll let you infer what you want over that. But that number is pretty consistent over the last year, but if you look in 2021 to really 2017, the majority of manufacturers, for the most part, did have one. That number is down a little bit over the 5-year look back. But most manufacturing executives tell us they do not have a formal strategic plan. I'm just assuming if they don't know they have one, they probably don't. That's my assumption. The real big takeaway here is, well, the easiest way to look at this is that percent yes among less than 1 million in revenue. 27% of manufacturers who make less than $1 million in revenue say they have a formal strategic plan. Those who make over 5 million in revenue, 71% say they have a strategic plan. You'll see in the next few slides, that is a pretty consistent theme throughout. Smaller manufacturers, both in terms of revenue and employee size, are much less likely to have a strategic plan than the larger ones. Does your company have your company's senior leadership have a succession plan? This is also one of my favorites. Among manufacturing executives, 7% of a company's senior leadership not sure they have a succession plan. They weren't able to answer that. But 45% said they do, 48% said they do not. So here again, less than a majority of manufacturers say they have a succession plan. And the differences between less than 1 million in revenue, that percent yes, compared to 5 million in revenue more, is pretty dramatic. This is a new question, first time we've asked it this year. Does your organization have a formal vision, mission, vision, and values? 43% of executives say they do, 54% said they do not. Not much difference in the data here by where the manufacturer is, but we see a much bigger gap between less than 1 million in revenue, where only 17% of those manufacturers say they have a formal mission, vision, and values, compared to 75% who have over 5 million in revenue. And that same trend in terms of employee size as well. Shifting gears a little bit here, on the left-hand side here, thinking about quality and business management system certifications. Is your company ISO certified? Very consistent data this year with what we saw last year. 18% of executives say their company is ISO certified, 71% said they are not. Among that 71% who said they are not, we asked them on the right-hand side, is your company getting ISO certified or have a plan to become ISO certified? And 91% of that 71% said they have no plans and they're not currently getting certified. 7% said they are. So when you combine that 18% who say they are ISO certified with the 7% of those who aren't but are planning to or currently doing it, you get 22% of manufacturers either are certified, are getting certified, or planning to become certified. 22%, which the inverse of that means 78% are not and have no plans to. Now, among those who are certified, we asked them, what are the 2 reasons why? And 2 really stand out. One is improved processes and performance. 40% say that's the main reason why they got certified. 34% said because a customer required it. To improve quality, 29%, grow profitability, 19%, competitive advantage, and retain and develop organizational knowledge down at the bottom.
Hi, I'm Jim Schottmuller from Enterprise Minnesota. I'm the Director of Business Development. The best people in an organization to move up the ladder have some knowledge of what's going on the floor. And so if you bring people in from outside, that tends to disrupt culture. If you take a look at folks who are at the organization already, and you can take them and move them up the ladder and give them the skills they need to be successful, that ends up giving you the most productivity and the best culture, because now they came up through the culture, you can have them emulate that.
One of the areas that we work with manufacturers, especially more recently, is in succession planning. And I can't think of a better time to be focused on succession planning in organizations, especially when we're in this time of economic uncertainty. We're having to evaluate who we have on the team, what the size of our team is, do we need to retract, do we need to grow? And ultimately, we need to make sure that we protect our key leaders, our key skills, and development. And we've been working with manufacturers from a succession planning, both at the ownership level, but also just organizational. And this gets overlooked by, I think, a lot of organizations, especially smaller manufacturers like those that we work with. It's so important, though, to think ahead about where we need to take the organization. And when we're facing a time of slowdown or recession, this is a great time to start investing in our people, do some development, skill development, training, internal, cross-training to make sure that we've created more capacity, more sort of leverage across our organization. Ultimately, we're going to be coming and growing, and we're going to need that capacity. But the real key part about succession planning, when we're thinking organizationally, it's not just, hey, do we have all the capacity we need? Do we have all the skills and training? It's those key individuals, those key leaders, those maybe key functions or roles. And do we have a backup plan? And what does that look like? Do we have a person identified that maybe as this leader moves on, that we've been training and developing, taking steps to move them back in? So critically important to take time, step back, look at our organization, identify those key positions, and start putting plans in place for the next 2 to 3 years of what that's going to look like and take us into the future.
Awesome. So I know we've thrown a lot of data at you today. I've just got a few more slides here to just kind of summarize some of the key takeaways from our perspective in terms of what we learned in this year's manufacturing survey. Big picture, clearly fears of a recession are down from where they were a year ago. A year ago, 43% of executives told us they felt we were heading into recession. This year, only 33%. And there's more heightened concern about uncertainty or a flat economy or economic stagnation. But it is really clear that from the survey data that this uncertainty is impacting how they outlook on their own business. When you look at projections for gross revenues or profitability, those are noticeably down from what we've seen over the last year or 2 years. Where they're investing in their business, we've seen that drop as well. And there's also a real sense that it's not necessarily going to get better. When we ask them about 2024, a plurality, 37%, believe we could have a recession next year. In terms of their reactions to what's happened in the state legislature this year, there's clearly some anxiety and concern about some of the changes and laws that have been passed. Most notably, requirements for paid family and medical leave, paid sick and safe leave, and cannabis in the workplace. And manufacturing executives tell us these are some of the key drivers for why they believe the business economy is not heading in the right direction. Main pain points for manufacturers this year: attracting qualified workers, the cost of healthcare coverage, and overall inflation. Inflationary concerns, like we saw with recession, are down from where they were a year ago, but it is still particularly important and concerning for smaller manufacturers. Healthcare costs have inched up a couple of points, and it's an issue that impacts smaller manufacturers as much as it impacts larger manufacturers. And then, despite the fact that workforce issues remains at the top of our list, manufacturers are also telling us that hiring has slowed. Noticeable drop, 8 points in the percentage of manufacturers who are hiring this year. It's dropped 18 points over the last 2 years. And even those companies that are hiring are only hiring a handful of workers. And then finally, manufacturers tell us that when it comes to strategic planning, a lot of that's being put on the back burner right now. Most manufacturers say they do not have a strategic plan in place. Most say they do not have a succession plan in place. And most say they do not have a formal mission, vision, and values. And that's it. Thank you so much. I'll ask Bob to come back up.
So sometimes I think our audience probably wonders, why do we bring a guy in from out of state to do this survey for 15 years? Rob Autry and his firm are truly a nationally recognized polling organization, and we want this data to be shared across lots of people who don't really understand or appreciate the value of manufacturing. And that's why we do this, but that's why we also put all the data on our website, and that's why we put the summary in the Enterprise Minnesota magazine, which comes out quarterly. I'd like to thank our sponsors again. We could not do it without our platinum sponsors. I think all of them have a small booth outside. Please frequent them. Many of you already use them for your services, but we could not do it with them. Let's take a second and just give them a nice round of applause for making this possible.